The fluorescent lights buzzed above me as I lay on the hospital gurney, my chest tight from the episode that had brought me here. The doctor called it stress-induced heart palpitations, a warning that at 63 my body could no longer pretend. Everything was fine. I tried to breathe steadily while the nurse adjusted my four and told me that my son had been contacted. For a moment, I let myself believe David would come, because he was my son and I was his mother, but then my phone buzzed with a notification. Melissa had tagged me in a post, and I thought maybe it was a kind message wishing me well, something small to remind me I wasn't forgotten, but when I opened it, the reality hit like a slap. There was a perfectly staged family dinner photo, David smiling at the head of my old dining table, Melissa sitting radiant in the chair that once belonged to me, and Chloe laughing freely as if nothing were missing. They were in my house, the home Tom and I had built, enjoying themselves as if I didn't exist. The caption beneath the picture made my chest seize harder than the palpitations ever could. Finally, a day without the drama queen. Family dinner is so much more peaceful. Hashtag blessed, hashtag drama free. It already had dozens of likes, with Nancy adding laughing emojis that cut deeper than any wound. The nurse asked again if my son was coming to pick me up, but I didn't need to check the timestamp to know the truth, though I did anyway. 20 minutes ago, exactly when the hospital had called David, he had chosen that dinner table over me. My voice stayed firm when I replied, "No, I'll call a taxi." Though inside I felt something break, I waited in the hospital lobby with the phone still heavy in my hand, staring at the picture that confirmed what I had refused to accept for years. They weren't worried about me. They were celebrating my absence. I could either continue being their silent victim, or I could finally act. My fingers trembled only for a second before I made a call I should have made long ago. "Barbara, it's Eleanor Hartwell," I said to my real estate agent, my voice turning sharp with resolve. "Remember the house on Maple Street, the one you said could sell in a week? I'm ready to list it." For the first time in years, I felt something stronger than grief, stronger than betrayal. I felt power returning to me. They thought they had erased me, but that night I made a decision that would change everything. 3 years earlier, after Tom's funeral, I believed I was doing the right thing as a mother, but looking back, I realized I was nothing more than a fool blinded by love. Tom had left me the house, his life insurance, and enough savings to live without struggle. Yet the silence inside that 4-bedroom home after his laughter was gone made every room feel like a cavern I could never fill. David seemed so attentive in those first weeks, stopping by almost daily, sometimes bringing Melissa and Chloe, carrying groceries, checking in on me, making me believe grief had drawn us closer. One evening on the porch, he said the words that planted the seed of my undoing. "Mom, you shouldn't be rattling around in this big house alone. It's not healthy." Melissa nodded with practiced sympathy, her voice soft as she added that all the memories must be too hard for me, and in my vulnerable state, I believed them. David suggested they move in temporarily, just until I decided what I wanted long-term, promising Chloe would have stability for school while I would never have to feel alone again. Melissa assured me it was only until they saved enough for their own place, maybe a year at most, and the idea seemed comforting. I told myself it was perfect. I would downsize to a small apartment nearby, let them enjoy the house while keeping my family close, and I felt grateful for their concern. What I didn't see was how quickly the narrative shifted from helping me to taking over. Within 6 months, they had moved in fully, and I was renting a cramped 1-bedroom across town, paying rent while they lived mortgage-free in the house. Tom and I had built over decades of hard work. I ignored the warning signs, the way David immediately spoke of property taxes, maintenance costs, and how overwhelming the burden of the house must be for me on a fixed income, even though Tom's investments meant I was far from struggling. I ignored the way my mail was quietly redirected to the Maple Street address under the guise of helping me manage paperwork. I ignored Melissa's assurances that everything was temporary because every time I asked about their plans to move out, there was a new crisis. David's job was unstable. Melissa claimed she was pregnant, though it turned out false. Then Chloe was struggling with school transitions. One excuse replaced another while the seasons changed and years passed, until temporary became permanent. When I visited what had once been my home, I felt like a stranger. My belongings vanished into storage or donation piles. Wallpaper Tom and I had chosen together was painted over without hesitation. Rooms that once carried our laughter echoed instead with Melissa's curated decor. But what hurt most wasn't the loss of walls or furniture, it was the slow erasure of myself. I wasn't just losing a house, I was disappearing from my own family's life, piece by piece, and I was too blind, too desperate for closeness to stop it. Sitting in the hospital lobby that night, with Melissa's cruel caption still burning, in my mind, I realized I had spent 3 years letting them control my life, but in that moment, something inside me shifted. I had always been the mother who sacrificed, the widow who endured, the woman who stayed quiet to keep peace, but lying. On that gurney, and then seeing my own son celebrate my absence pushed me past a line I didn't know existed. When I picked up the phone to call Barbara Henderson, my real estate agent, it wasn't just about selling a house, it was about reclaiming my life. Barbara, sharp as ever, answered on the first ring, her voice brisk and professional. When I told her I was ready to list the Maple Street house, she laughed, not unkindly, but with the satisfaction of someone who had been waiting for me to wake up. "That's the Eleanor I remember," she said, and for the first time in years, I heard my name spoken with respect instead of dismissal. The next morning, Barbara came to my small apartment, and with her was Patricia Morgan, an attorney whose presence filled the room with quiet authority. Patricia spread papers across my kitchen table, her sharp eyes scanning me as she asked whether there had been any formal lease agreements or rent payments from David and Melissa. I shook my head, embarrassed to admit that everything had been based on trust, on family helping family. Patricia exchanged a look with Barbara, and in that silence, I understood I had been naive. Patricia explained that while it was good news that I still held full ownership, it also meant David and Melissa might try to twist the situation, claiming tenant protections or even adverse possession after years of living in the house. The seal the words tasted bitter like poison, but the truth was unavoidable. I had let them settle in so completely that they could now argue I had no right to my own home. Barbara pulled out a folder and laid it on the table with deliberate care. "There's something you need to see," she said. Inside were tax records, each one showing liens that had been filed and released in the last 18 months. I frowned, confused. Home improvement loans, all properly documented, all repaid. But I had never signed for them, never even heard of them. My pulse quickened as Patricia leaned forward and asked when I had last checked my credit report. My mouth went dry because I couldn't remember 2 years, maybe longer. Patricia's expression hardened as she made a call to a credit monitoring service, her tone clipped and efficient. She said quietly that there were several accounts requiring immediate investigation, all linked to the address of the house on Maple Street. As I sat there in my small apartment, with the weight of betrayal pressing down harder than any chest. Pain, I realized the truth I had been too blind to see. While I believed I was being a generous mother giving my son's family shelter, they had been carefully, systematically stripping me of everything I had. They hadn't just taken over my house, they had been taking over my life. Patricia's calm voice carried a weight that made the air in my apartment feel heavy. She explained that while I still owned the house completely, David and Melissa could try to claim legal protections, but that was only the beginning of the nightmare. When Barbara slid the folder of tax records across the table, I thought it was just routine paperwork, but my world tilted as I read. Multiple liens had been filed in the past year and a half, supposedly for home improvements. Each loan was documented, processed, and paid off, but I had never authorized any of it. My stomach churned as Patricia leaned forward, her sharp eyes narrowing. "Eleanor, when did you last check your credit report?" My throat went dry. I couldn't remember, maybe 2 years ago, maybe longer. She immediately called a monitoring service, her tone clipped with urgency, and within minutes she confirmed what I dreaded. Accounts had been opened in my name, credit cards I never touched, loans I never signed, activity tied directly to the Maple Street address. I sat frozen as the truth unfolded, every word slicing through the last illusions I had clung to. While I thought I was being kind, giving them a home, they had been quietly building a case around me, controlling what mail I received, intercepting bank statements, screening my financial life until I was blind to what was really happening. They weren't just taking advantage of my generosity. They were stealing from me, piece by piece, until even my identity no longer belonged to me. The reality was brutal. My son and his wife had been living not only in my house, but also off my name, my credit, my trust, weaving a web that left me trapped in my own silence. As Patricia gathered her papers and promised to investigate further, I could barely hear her through the pounding of my heart. All I could think was how easily I had let them in, how quickly trust had turned into chains, and how every act of kindness I offered had been twisted into a weapon against me. In that moment, I knew this wasn't just a family problem anymore. It was theft. It was betrayal. It was war. The next morning, my phone rang before I had even finished my first cup of coffee. David's name flashing on the screen like a warning siren. I let it go to voicemail, and when I listened, his voice carried the same arrogance I had grown used to, the kind that assumed I would always bend. "Mom, we need to talk. Some crazy woman is calling about listing the house. Obviously, there's been a mistake. Call me back immediately." He spoke as if the very idea of me making a decision without his approval was unthinkable. Before the message even ended, the phone rang again. This time it was Melissa, her tone sharper, her words cutting the air like glass. "Eleanor, what the hell is going on?" "Some real estate agent called David, saying she's our listing agent. This has to be a scam." I took a slow sip of coffee and finally answered, my voice steady, my patience gone. "Actually, Barbara Henderson is my listing agent. She's been in business for 30 years, so I wouldn't call her a scammer." The silence that followed was thick until Melissa shrieked, "Your listing agent? What are you talking about? You don't own the house anymore. We've been living here for 3 years." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Living there, yes. Owning it now. The deed has always been in my name. For the first time, I could hear hesitation crack through Melissa's confidence. Then David's voice cut in, full of outrage. "Mom, you can't just sell our home out from under us." Those 2 words, our home, hit me like a blow. My voice sharpened as I answered. "It stopped being our home the moment you celebrated my absence on social media." Melissa stuttered, trying to backpedal, but I pressed forward. "Finally, a day without the drama queen. Ring any bells?" "You posted that while I was lying in the emergency room yesterday." The line went silent, guilt choking them, but I wasn't done. My tone dropped, cold and deliberate. "We're also going to talk about finances. About the $75,000 home equity loan taken out in my name 6 months ago." The silence on the other end was deafening, and for the first time, I felt the power shift. They weren't in control anymore. After hanging up on David and Melissa, I sat alone in my kitchen with a notebook and a pen. And for the first time in years, I began writing not a grocery list, not chores, but an accounting of every betrayal I had swallowed in silence. February, I asked David to help move furniture in my apartment. He said he was busy, yet the same day he posted photos from a ski trip. January, I went to Chloe's school play. Melissa forgot to save me a seat, so I stood in the back like a stranger while empty chairs sat in the front row. December, Christmas morning, I brought gifts for everyone. They handed me a clearance rack candle with the price tag still on it. The list grew longer with each line, and as my pen carved the truth onto paper, I realized it wasn't forgetfulness. It wasn't busyness, it was deliberate. That night, I scrolled through Melissa's social media, something I had avoided for years, and the truth was louder than any words they had ever spoken to me. Dozens of family photos, vacations I was never told about, dinners I was never invited to, birthdays I didn't even know had happened. Each post was curated to show a perfect family life, and in every image my absence was glaring, as if I had already been erased. What cut deepest were the comments. Friends asking where I was, and Melissa replying with lies. She's not really social anymore. She prefers to stay home. She's going through some things. They painted me as broken, fragile, a burden, while they played the role of the perfect, caring family. And under Chloe's 12th birthday photo, the words that shattered the last piece of denial inside me. Mom's gotten really demanding about attention and involvement. We decided it was better to keep things small and stress-free for closest sake. My own son, excusing my erasure as though love from a grandmother were an inconvenience, but the truth Patricia uncovered was even worse. The $75,000 loan wasn't the only theft. There were multiple credit cards opened in my name, personal loans I had never signed, even store accounts tied to their address but connected to me. Each statement painted the picture of a lifestyle I never lived: yoga memberships, trainers, tennis lessons, designer clothes, luxury dinners, spa treatments, and an $8,000 vacation to Mexico over Christmas while I sat alone believing they wanted things low-key. I printed everything I could, every forged signature, every fraudulent charge, and the evidence piled high on my table until I could no longer deny the truth. For 3 years, while I thought I was giving them a chance to build their lives, they had been methodically dismantling mine. They weren't just ungrateful. They were thieves, liars, and predators. And I was finally awake. The next morning, Patricia returned with a grim expression. And when she spread the credit report across my table, I felt my chest tighten all over. Again, the fraudulent loans and credit cards were terrible enough, but what she pointed out chilled me more than anything else. Multiple inquiries from elder law attorneys, financial institutions, and agencies specializing in guardianship assessments. She explained the pattern in a voice that left no room for doubt. They weren't just stealing from me. They were preparing to have me declared incompetent, to strip away not only my finances, but my independence, my very identity, to lock me into a role where they controlled everything while I became nothing more than their dependent. The realization made my blood run cold. All the isolation, the lies on social media, the narrative that I was fragile and confused. It was deliberate groundwork for a conservatorship case. My phone buzzed constantly that day. David and Melissa, calling from numbers I didn't recognize, leaving voicemails filled with half pleas, half threats, but I ignored them. By noon, a knock on my door pulled me from my thoughts. When I opened it, Chloe stood there with a suitcase, tears streaking her young face. My granddaughter's voice shook as she begged, "Grandma, please don't make us homeless. Mom says we'll have to live in the car." Behind her, parked on the street, I saw David and Melissa waiting, far enough to appear uninvolved, close enough to direct her performance. My heart broke as I pulled her inside, Furious at how low they had stooped, using their own child as a weapon, I sat her down gently and asked if they had told her why I was selling the house. She shook her head and whispered that they only said I didn't want them to be happy anymore. I explained carefully that her parents had never planned to move out, that instead they had used my name to borrow money for things she had never seen or enjoyed. When I told her about the $8,000 trip to Mexico over Christmas, her eyes widened and she whispered that she hadn't been there. She had stayed with a friend because her parents said they were helping sick relatives. The truth hit me like a hammer. They had abandoned their 12-year-old daughter so they could vacation on stolen money. I walked her back down to the car, her small hand trembling in mine, and when David rolled down the window, his smug voice asked if Chloe had talked sense into me. My answer was sharp and unwavering. I warned him that if he ever used his daughter to manipulate me again, I would add child endangerment to the criminal charges I had already filed that morning. His face drained of color. Melissa's voice shot back in protest, claiming they had stolen nothing, insisting it was all family expenses, but I laughed bitterly. Tennis lessons Chloe never took, vacations she never joined, jewelry bought while I was lying in a hospital bed. Their lies fell apart in their own daughter's silence. I opened the back door, looked David in the eye, and told him plainly that Chloe's coming with me. If they wanted to learn how to be parents, they could do it without using their child as bait dot. By the time Chloe settled into my apartment that night, I had already made the decision that there would be no more hesitation, no more waiting for them to show even a shred of decency. Patricia and Barbara came the next morning, and the kitchen table turned into a war room covered in documents, statements, and evidence of every fraudulent act David and Melissa had committed. Patricia's team worked like soldiers preparing for battle, their focus razor sharp, and when she spoke, her words confirmed what I already knew. Identity theft, credit fraud, forgery, elder abuse. This wasn't a family misunderstanding. It was a criminal enterprise, and I was done being their victim. The district attorney's office accepted the case immediately because the amount stolen was staggering and the pattern of manipulation was undeniable. While Patricia began the legal process, Barbara accelerated the house listing, reminding me that the longer they stayed in Maple Street, the more time they had to twist the narrative. For once, I didn't flinch at the thought of them finding out. I wanted them to know I was fighting back. When David called again, his voice frantic, begging me to talk things through as a family, I cut him off with a single reply. Family doesn't steal identities. Family doesn't abandon each other in hospitals. Family doesn't lie to a child and use her as bait. You did this, not me. Then I hung up and blocked his number, but nothing prepared me for the next blow, the discovery of just how deep their betrayal ran. Patricia uncovered not only the loans and credit cards, but also drafts of legal petitions on their computer, evidence that they were days away from filing to have me declared incompetent. Every intercepted letter, every whispered lie, every carefully curated story on social media was part of a plan to strip me of my voice forever. The only reason it hadn't worked was because I had chosen to fight back. The timeline was clear. They expected me to remain passive, to accept the role of burden, but instead I had flipped the script. That afternoon when David and Melissa pulled up outside my apartment again, their car idling like a predator waiting to pounce, Chloe clutched my hand and whispered she didn't want to go back. I looked her in the eye and promised that she wouldn't, not while I had breath in my body. I walked her downstairs, and when David demanded to know what criminal charges I was talking about, I didn't hesitate. I listed every single crime, every dollar stolen, every lie uncovered, and I watched the blood drain from his face. Melissa tried to protest, but her words rang hollow, excuses collapsing under the weight of the truth. For the first time in 3 Years I stood tall, unafraid, and I made it clear their days of control were over. 3 weeks later, Patricia's office looked less like a law firm and more like a battlefield command center. Every surface was covered with files, financial statements, legal drafts, and evidence that painted the truth in undeniable detail. Chloe sat quietly beside me, coloring in a book, though her young eyes followed every word with more understanding than a 12-year-old should ever need. Patricia explained that the fraud stretched back further than we thought, that David and Melissa's pattern of manipulation had started even before they moved into my house. She slid a background report across the table, and as I read, the pieces clicked into place. Before me, there was Margaret, David's elderly aunt, who had died at 84 after 2 years of living with them. The church that inherited her house later uncovered suspicious financial irregularities, but with Margaret showing signs of dementia, the family never pursued charges. Now I saw the truth clearly. They had done this before. I was not their first. Victim Nancy, my sister-in-law, confirmed what I had long suspected when she finally called me. Her voice trembled with guilt as she admitted she had overheard David and Melissa twisting the narrative for years, painting me as fragile, paranoid, and incompetent to the rest of the family. They intercepted calls. They lied about why I wasn't present. They convinced everyone that I was too unstable to handle my own affairs. It was a deliberate campaign to isolate me until their story was the only version people believed. Hearing her confess that she had stayed silent out of fear and discomfort both hurt and vindicated me, because now I had proof that this wasn't just financial fraud. It was character assassination designed to strip me of power before they ever went to court. Patricia worked tirelessly, filing for emergency custody of Chloe on grounds of abandonment and neglect, and within days the hearing was set. When we walked into that courtroom, I felt years of humiliation pressing against me, but instead of bowing under its weight, I held my head high. The judge listened carefully as Patricia presented the evidence: bank statements showing fraudulent loans, credit reports filled with accounts I never opened, proof of vacations funded with stolen money, and testimony about Chloe being left with friends while her parents lived lavishly. Melissa sat pale and trembling, David shifting in his seat, anger flashing across his face as the truth left him cornered. When the judge turned his gaze toward me and asked if I wished to speak, I stood without hesitation. My voice did not shake as I told the court that I had spent 3 years watching my family erase me, that they had used grief as a weapon, that they had not only stolen money but stolen my dignity, and that if I had not fought back, I would have lost everything, including my identity. Chloe looked up at me then, her small hand squeezing mine, and with more courage than many adults, she said clearly that she did not want to go back home until her parents stopped lying. Her words cut through the courtroom louder than any piece of paper. The judge granted me temporary custody on the spot, citing neglect and financial misconduct as proof that David and Melissa were unfit parents. Patricia leaned toward me and whispered that we had just won the first major battle, but from the look on David's face, I knew the war inside him had only begun. Yet for once, he was no longer the one holding the power. 6 weeks after filing the charges, the Maple Street house finally sold. Barbara found cash buyers within days, and when the bidding war ended, I walked through those empty rooms one last time. The walls that once echoed with Tom's laughter and then years of manipulation now stood silent, and though sadness tugged at me, I felt a surge of freedom stronger than anything I had known in years. Chloe ran her fingers along the walls where her height had once been marked, whispering that it felt strange to see the house empty. I told her it looked different without furniture and lies filling it, and for the first time in a long time, she smiled. The check I held in my hands represented not just financial security, but the return of my independence, my dignity, my voice. Patricia kept me updated constantly as the district attorney built the elder abuse case, and the evidence was overwhelming. David pled guilty to identity theft, fraud, and elder abuse, accepting 2 years in prison and restitution of over $120,000. Melissa, painted by her attorney as merely following his lead, received 18 months of community service, though Jennifer's testimony about their grandmother's case left no doubt that she was every bit as guilty. The investigation reached back to Aunt Margaret, recovering nearly $80,000 stolen before her death. Justice delayed, but not denied. Chloe now lived with me permanently, the custody hearing revealing not only the neglect she had endured, but the truth of how little her parents had valued her presence. With every passing day, she flourished: new school, new friends, therapy that helped her understand she was not to blame. Watching her laugh freely, unburdened, reminded me of the girl she could finally become without lies weighing on her shoulders. Together, we built a life in a modest new house in Asheville, North Carolina, one filled with honesty, peace, and the sound of real love instead of manipulation. I began volunteering at the Elder Abuse Prevention Center, helping others recognize the signs I had ignored for too long, and each story I heard broke my heart but strengthened my resolve. Too many victims suffered in silence, believing love excused betrayal. But I had learned the hardest truth of all: sometimes the people you trust most are the ones who destroy you the deepest. And yet, survival isn't just about escaping. It's about rebuilding with strength that no one can take again. Sometimes people ask if I regret how it all turned out. I tell them I regret not seeing sooner. I regret wasting 3 years believing lies, but I do not regret fighting back. I do not regret reclaiming my dignity. I do not regret protecting Chloe from parents who cared more about luxury than her happiness. And I will never regret proving that I was not incompetent, not fragile, not dramatic, but a woman who refused to be erased. Now, when David calls from prison asking for money or favors, I keep the conversations short, civil, but detached. Some bonds, once broken, can never be repaired. I no longer live for their approval. I live for peace, for Chloe, for the freedom I carved back with my own hands. One afternoon, Chloe called me to see the sign she had hammered onto her treehouse. It read, "Eleanor and Chloe's Clubhouse. No drama queens allowed." I laughed, my heart full, because she had understood something at 12 that had taken me a lifetime to learn. The people who call you dramatic are usually the ones creating all the drama.